Begin with our next topic, that is postpartum hemorrhage. The first part, as I said, this topic will be covered in two parts since again it's a vast topic. Lost time can never be found. This statement could not be truer, especially with respect to postpartum hemorrhage, where every second counts. So let's see how we are going to divide this topic. Yeah. So part one is going to comprise incidence, definition, classification, estimation of blood loss, risk factors and etiology, physiology of the third stage of labor, which is very important, medical management of postpartum hemorrhage, active management of third stage of labor, another very important aspect, third stage bleeding, management of postpartum hemorrhage proper, and the sequelae. Part 2, which will be held the following Sunday, will explain mechanical management and surgical management in detail, blood and blood product transfusion in detail, secondary postpartum hemorrhage and its management, and the prophylaxis of postpartum hemorrhage. So let's begin with maternal mortality ratio. As we can see, maternal mortality ratio of 2017, as of 2017, is 211 per lakh live births. There has been a positive decline in the maternal mortality ratio over the years, that is from 2000 till the current date. However, there is a wide disparity in the maternal mortality ratio in the developing countries and the developed nations. Okay, maternal mortality ratio in India, as per the sample registration system 2017, is 122 per lakh live births. So how does postpartum hemorrhage contribute to this? So we can see from this figure here, rather a pie chart, that obstetric hemorrhage contributes around 35% of maternal mortalities. And postpartum hemorrhage is a major cause of death in women, especially in the developing nations. Again, there is a wide disparity in the developing countries and the developed nations. So postpartum hemorrhage contributes almost 60% of deaths in the developing nations. It is a preventable cause, and it is up to us to rightly manage this complication. So let's start with the topic, the definition of postpartum hemorrhage. So primary postpartum hemorrhage is traditionally defined as a loss of more than or equal to 500 ml of blood from the genital tract within 24 hours of the birth of a baby. However, remember, any amount of blood loss which threatens the hemodynamic stability of the woman constitutes postpartum hemorrhage. So for example, if a woman has moderate to severe anemia, even a smaller amount of blood loss is going to result in significant hemodynamic instability in her, and this is still defined as postpartum hemorrhage, even though the absolute loss of blood volume is less than 500 ml. So postpartum hemorrhage is divided into primary and secondary. Primary postpartum hemorrhage is when bleeding occurs in the first 24 hours postpartum. Secondary hemorrhage is bleeding occurring after 24 hours, but within 12 weeks postpartum. So now take a look at this bar diagram. It compares the amount of blood loss seen in vaginal delivery, in repeat cesarean delivery, and in repeat cesarean with hysterectomy. So you can see in vaginal delivery, maximum number of patients have a blood loss equivalent to less than 500 ml. Repeat cesarean delivery, maximum people have a blood loss around 500 to 1000 ml. And repeat cesarean hysterectomy has a severe amount of hemorrhage. Even normally, around 50% of them will have a hemorrhage more than 2500 ml. Okay, so amount of blood loss is highest in cesarean hysterectomy, followed by repeat cesarean delivery, and lowest in vaginal delivery. So based on these parameters, traditionally PPH has been defined as blood loss more than or equal to 500 ml at vaginal delivery, 1000 ml at cesarean section, or 1500 ml at cesarean hysterectomy. Okay. Now amount of hemorrhage. So minor hemorrhage is defined as loss of blood between 500 and 1000 ml of blood. Major hemorrhage when blood loss is more than 1000 ml. Okay, so major hemorrhage is further divided into moderate and severe. Moderate is when blood loss is between 1000 and 2000 ml, and severe when it is more than 2000 ml. Coming to estimation of blood loss, again, very important for management of postpartum hemorrhage. Objective methods of measurement of blood loss are there, but they are not frequently used. What is most commonly used for estimation of blood loss is the visual estimation. Okay, but visual estimation is the most inaccurate method of estimation of blood loss, unfortunately. It estimates only approximately half of actual loss. Of course, because a lot of blood is lost on the floor, is spilled on the floor, maybe it's collected in the buckets down, it soaks up the sheets. So a lot of blood which you actually see, it is not the actual amount of blood loss. The actual amount of blood loss is way more than visually estimated. Certain other methods which are at least semi-quantitative or objective. One is the blood collection drape. So you have these pictures over here. This is a birthing drape. It's a plastic V-shaped container sort of thing in which all the postpartum blood is accumulated, and most of these birthing drapes are calibrated, so you can directly measure the amount of blood loss, something like a urine bag. Okay, some of these which are not calibrated, you can weigh it later, and by a gravimetric method you can estimate the amount of blood loss. Next method is direct volumetric method. We will be seeing this in the next slide. Gravimetric method is weighing the mops and clots. So you can even weigh the dry weight before soakage of the mops, and then after soakage you reweigh the mops. Difference in these two weights in grams is equivalent to the blood loss in milliliters. Okay. Similarly with clots, generally clot which is of the size of a fist is approximately 50 grams in weight. So to convert this to milliliters, there is a clot conversion factor which is roughly 1.5. So weight of clot in grams multiplied by around 1.5 will give you the rough estimate of blood loss in ml. Next, objective methods are postpartum hemoglobin and hematocrit. This again takes some time for the hemoglobin to drop, for the hematocrit to drop, for your laboratory tests to come. Okay, so it is not the best method for estimation of blood loss when postpartum hemorrhage management is required instantly. Photospectrometry, this is the most accurate method, but unfortunately it is extremely costly. It involves complicated equipment like a photospectrometer, and mostly it is used only for research and trial purposes. Day-to-day obstetric units, it is not feasible to have photospectrometry for estimation of blood loss. Yeah, so this is the direct volumetric method in which the percentage saturation of a particular size of mop is converted into milliliters of blood loss. Okay, so depending upon the size of mop you're using, 10 by 10 centimeters or 30 by 30 centimeters, 45 by 45 centimeters, and depending upon the percentage saturation, you can easily find out on a rough estimate the amount of blood loss for calculation of the estimated amount of blood loss. Okay. Coming to risk factors and etiology, we all know the 4 T's which are responsible for postpartum hemorrhage. One is tone, that is atonic uterus, which constitutes 80 to 90% cases of postpartum hemorrhage. Next is tissue, that is retained placenta or retained blood clots. Trauma, any lacerations, uterine inversion constitutes trauma, and thrombi. So coagulopathies is included under thrombi. So let's take a look at each of these. So tone, what are the risk factors for atonic uterus? Overdistended uterus in cases of macrosomia, polyhydramnios, multifetal gestation. Uterine muscle exhaustion, again due to prolonged labor or even precipitate labor. Intraamniotic infection in cases of prolonged rupture of membranes. Anatomical distortion of the uterus in case of fibroids, uterine malformations, and placenta previa. Again, all these are risk factors for atonicity in the postpartum period. Tissue factors, retained placenta, so incomplete placental delivery. Accrete syndromes, very important, that is morbidly there in placenta. Retained cotyledon in cases of subcensurate lobe where there are placental abnormalities. And retained blood clots. Okay, so hemorrhage begets hemorrhage. So more the amount of blood accumulation in the uterine cavity, more it hinders or interferes with the ability of the uterus to contract, and therefore it promotes more hemorrhage. Okay, so retained blood clots is a cause of uterine atonicity, which further results in hemorrhage. Trauma, which includes lacerations of the cervix, the vagina, the perineum. Extension or lacerations at cesarean section especially in cases of difficult deliveries like in malpositions or deep transverse arrest, uterine rupture in cases of previously scarred uterus, and uterine inversion. Okay. Thrombi, pre-existing hereditary coagulopathies like hemophilias, von Willebrand's disease, disseminated intravascular coagulation due to a number of causes like abruption, intrauterine fetal demise, and infection. Therapeutic anticoagulation for patients with, say, valvular heart diseases who are on therapeutic warfarin therapy. And idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, again, it does increase the propensity for hemorrhage in the postpartum period. Coming to the physiology of the third stage of labor. Now remember that pregnancy has naturally been modified in such a way so as to reduce postpartum loss. Okay, so what are the factors which are already present in the physiological changes which take place in pregnancy which reduce this blood loss? Increased blood volume during pregnancy allows postpartum blood loss without any detrimental effect on the mother. Okay. Activation of the coagulation system in pregnancy. So pregnancy is a hypercoagulable state, and this in turn prevents excess amounts of postpartum hemorrhage. And lastly, the living ligatures, very important, uterine musculature. So take a look at this diagram here, or this figure here. These represent the myometrial fibers, spindle-shaped myometrial fibers arranged in a crisscross or trellis fashion with intervening blood vessels. These are the uterine spiral arteries. Once the baby delivery and placenta are out, there is a uterine contraction and permanent shortening of the uterine musculature, which is also called retraction. And in this process, the blood vessels are compressed and further bleeding is stopped. So this is called as a myotamponade, and it is a very important mechanism to prevent excess amounts of bleeding, especially from the placental implantation site. Okay. Part of physiology of third stage of labor, you need to know what are the various mechanisms by placenta separates. So most important is the central separation of the placenta, where the central part is separated first. It is called the Schultz method. Okay, 70% of the times, this is the method by which placenta separates. Second method is the marginal separation of the placenta. So first the placenta separates marginally and then advances further till the entire placenta is separated. This is called as Matthew Duncan's method of separation of the placenta. Okay. Now, before taking a look at active management of third stage of labor, let us see what drugs do we have at our disposition to manage postpartum bleeding. Okay. So most important in medical management are uterotonics. And the first line agent is oxytocin. It acts by combining with the oxytocin receptors present on the uterus and causes a physiological contraction of the uterus. Okay, so it can be given intravenously, it can be given intramuscularly. The dose is 20 to 40 units in 1 liter of crystalloid solution, which could be Ringer's lactate or normal saline, or 10 units intramuscular on delivery of the baby. Routes, intravenous, but intravenous it should be given as a continuous infusion, not as a bolus dose, or intramuscular. Dosing frequency in intravenous administration, continuous IV administration at around 125 ml per hour. Side effects include nausea, hypotension, water intoxication, and contraindications, as I said, IV bolus should not be given because it can precipitate severe hypotension and cardiac arrhythmias. So avoid giving an IV bolus of oxytocin. Second line agent, this agent is preferred, that is ergometrin, if uterine atony is not controlled by oxytocin alone. So you can add ergometrin or methyl ergometrin. These are ergot derivatives which have been isolated from Claviceps purpura, which is a kind of fungus. Okay, whereas methyl ergometrin is a semi-synthetic compound. Dose is 0.2 mg. Route of administration intramuscular or intravenous. Intravenous, you have to give it very slowly in a diluted form, preferably. Dosing frequency every 2 to 4 hourly if uterine contraction has not been achieved. Nausea and vomiting and hypertension are its side effects. So very important to remember that ergometrin, methyl ergometrin can lead to arterial vasoconstriction and hypertension. Therefore, in contraindications, never to be given in hypertensive patients, never to be given in preeclampsia or eclampsia. Okay. Also, never to be combined with protease inhibitors. Protease inhibitors are drugs which are given as a part of antiretroviral regimen. in patients who are HIV positive. So you have to make sure that patients who are taking protease inhibitors are not given ergometrin for control of postpartum hemorrhage because of drug interaction leading to severe hypertension. Next drug we have is 15-methyl PGF2 alpha. This drug should be given only when uterine contraction is not achieved even after administration of oxytocin ergometrin. Okay, it has to be stored in the refrigerator at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Also, it is a slightly expensive drug. The dose is 250 micrograms, can be given intramuscularly or intramyometrial. Intramyometrial, however, there have been case reports of sudden myocardial ischemia, sudden myocardial infarction, and even non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema on administration of PGF2 alpha or carboprost intramyometrially. Okay, so you have to be very careful. IV dose should never be given. Remember that. Dosing frequency, it can be given every 15 minutes to 90 minutes, but maximum doses are 8 doses. So that is a total maximum dose is 2 mg, 2 milligrams. Side effects, all these side effects are important with respect to carboprost: nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, hypertension, fever, flushing, tachycardia. Contraindications: bronchial asthma. Okay, so PGF2 alpha can also stimulate pulmonary and bronchial constriction. Therefore, should never be given in patients with bronchial asthma or patients with active cardiac, renal or hepatic disease, or those with hypersensitivity to the drug. Okay. And the last drug in our armamentarium is misoprostol, which is a prostaglandin E1 analog. Dose is 600 to 1000 micrograms. And it is the only uterotonic which can be given orally. Okay, so orally or parectally, and that is why misoprostol has found its way, especially in the rural settings or in the low resource settings where parenteral administration of other uterotonics is not possible, and therefore the Maternal Health Division and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, in the 2015 guidance for postpartum hemorrhage management, have included misoprostol if oxytocin is either not available or trained birth attendant is not available for administration of oxytocin, or an IV line cannot be secured. Then in such cases, misoprostol 600 micrograms orally should be given to prevent as well as to treat postpartum hemorrhage. So what are the routes of administration? Per rectal, oral and sublingual. Single dose is enough for management, and side effects include fever, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and tachycardia. Misoprostol has been shown to be more effective or superior to at least placebo in a number of studies. Okay, so it is better to give misoprostol than to not give anything at all. Okay, next drug, Syntometrin. It is a combination of oxytocin 5 units and ergometrin 0.5 units, always to be administered intramuscularly. Oxytocin, as I had mentioned, it has a physiological effect of contraction on the uterus. So the fundus contracts first with simultaneous relaxation of the lower uterine segment and the cervix, and slowly the contraction wave descends downwards. So it's a physiological contraction of the uterus. Oxytocin should ideally be stored at a controlled room temperature, that is less than 25 degrees Celsius, but that is not possible in the Indian scenario. And therefore, it is recommended that oxytocin should be stored at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius in the refrigerator. Otherwise, it's going to lose its effectiveness. Ergometrin, on the other hand, stimulates tetanic contractions of the uterus, which is spasmodic contractions of the uterus. The entire uterus contracts as a whole. Okay. Now, comparison between ergometrin, methyl ergometrin, oxytocin, and Syntometrin with respect to onset of action and duration of action. So let's take a look at ergometrin first. Ergometrin, when injected intravenously, onset of action is rapid, 45 to 60 seconds. Intramuscularly, slightly longer onset of action, 6 to 7 minutes. Orally, that is the oral ergometrin tablets, onset of action is almost 10 minutes. Duration of action, 45 minutes if it is injected IV, and 3 hours for intramuscular. Methyl ergometrin, slightly delayed onset of action with intravenous also as compared to ergometrin, 1.5 minutes. Intramuscular has an onset of action of 7 minutes. Orally, when given, it is 10 minutes. Duration of action is 3 hours. Oxytocin has a very rapid onset of action when given as an intravenous infusion. So 30 seconds is the onset of action. Intramuscular also it is pretty quick, 2.5 minutes. However, duration of action is very short. It's a short-lived drug because its half-life is only 3 to 4 minutes. So duration of action is 8 minutes. So Sintometrin was devised in such a way so as to use the rapid onset of action of oxytocin and the longer duration of action of ergometrin. So Sintometrin, intramuscular dose, onset of action is 2.5 minutes and duration of action is 3 hours. Okay. Next drug, very important drug, is tranexamic acid. Okay, it is not a uterotonic agent, it is an antifibrinolytic agent. Mechanism of action is as follows. It inhibits the conversion of plasminogen to its active form, that is plasmin, and plasmin, which in turn degrades fibrin to fibrin degradation products, is inhibited. So these steps, when inhibited, tranexamic acid prevents clot lysis. Therefore, it is an antifibrinolytic agent. Okay. Now, there was a very huge trial regarding tranexamic acid called as World Maternal Antifibrinolytic Trial, or the Woman Trial, to study the effect of early tranexamic acid administration on mortality, hysterectomy, and other morbidities in women with postpartum hemorrhage. And it was found that death due to bleeding was significantly reduced in those with tranexamic acid, especially when given within 3 hours of birth. It was a very widespread trial which included 20,000 women, and the duration of the trial was from March 2010 to April 2016. And depending on the results of this very trial, WHO updated its recommendation on tranexamic acid for treatment of postpartum hemorrhage in 2017. And these are the recommendations. So WHO recommends early use of intravenous tranexamic acid within 3 hours of birth, in addition to the standard care for women with clinically diagnosed PPH following vaginal birth or cesarean section. Administration of tranexamic acid should be considered as a part of the standard PPH treatment package and should be administered as soon as possible after onset of bleeding and within 3 hours of birth. Tranexamic acid for treatment of PPH should not be initiated more than 3 hours after birth because it's of no use then. Tranexamic acid should be used in all cases of postpartum hemorrhage, regardless of whether the bleeding is due to genital tract trauma or other causes. So in the previous recommendation, they had recommended use of tranexamic acid only in cases where bleeding is due to genital tract trauma. But now they're recommending it even in other causes of postpartum hemorrhage, for example, atonic uterus. Tranexamic acid should be administered at a fixed dose of 1 gram in 10 ml, that is 100 mg per ml concentration, intravenously at the rate of 1 ml per minute, that is slow IV administration over 10 minutes, with a second dose of 1 gram IV if bleeding continues after 30 minutes. Okay. Tranexamic acid should be administered via an IV route only for treatment of PPH. Research on other routes of tranexamic acid administration is a priority. Okay. Coming to the next adjuvant therapy for management of postpartum hemorrhage, recombinant factor 7A. Now, it is a synthetic vitamin K protein. It binds to the exposed tissue factor at the site of injury and activates the extrinsic coagulation pathway. So traditionally, factor 7A has been used in cases of hemophilia. However, in non-hemophiliac cases, one of the major concerns with use of recombinant factor 7A, is arterial and venous thrombosis. Okay. Other drawbacks include limited availability and very high cost. So financial constraints is another issue with recombinant factor 7A. RCOG in their Green Top Guideline 47 concerning blood transfusion in obstetrics has suggested the use of recombinant factor 7A may be considered as a treatment for life-threatening postpartum hemorrhage, but should not be considered as a substitute for, nor should it delay the performance of a life-saving procedure such as embolization or surgery, nor the transfer to a referral center. So basically, it should be used as an adjuvant therapy. There are case reports of effectiveness of recombinant factor 7A in intractable obstetric hemorrhage, but experience of its use in non-hemophiliac bleeding remains limited. Okay, Also, incidence of thrombotic complications, as I said, arterial and venous thrombosis in non-hemophiliac patients following administration of factor 7A is still unknown. Widespread studies still need to be undertaken to find out what is the actual risk. Coming to the next important aspect of postpartum hemorrhage, which is active management of the third stage of labor. So what all is present in active management? First important, uterotonic agents should be administered within 1 minute of baby delivery. And the preferred agent for this is oxytocin 10 units intramuscular. Okay, alternative agent would be ergometrin 0.2 mg intramuscular. Next, cord clamping and ligation. So previously it was suggested that early cord clamping should be done. However, now WHO recommends that early cord clamping should not be done unless it is absolutely necessary. In fact, the cord should not be clamped any sooner than is necessary. Delayed cord clamping, especially in preterm babies, is very important because it reduces the chances of neonatal anemia, decreased hematocrit in the neonatal period, as well as decreases the chances of blood transfusion. Okay, so delayed cord clamping around 1 to 3 minutes, but no longer than 3 minutes is now advised. Situations where early cord clamping should be done is patients in whom the baby is severely asphyxiated or is compromised and requires immediate neonatal resuscitation. So that is one of the most important indications of early cord clamping. Clamp the cord, cut the cord, hand the baby over to the neonatologist. Okay. Next, controlled cord traction for delivery of the placenta. We'll be seeing this in detail as to how the procedure should be performed. And it should be done only after signs of placental separation, that is gush of blood from the vulva, permanent lengthening of the umbilical cord, contraction of the fundus of the uterus, and a globular nature of the fundus of the uterus once the placenta has separated and is lying in the lower uterine segment. This should be repeated every 2 to 3 minutes with each uterine contraction until the placenta is delivered. Okay, but remember, if placenta is not delivered within 20 minutes, most likely the patient is going to go for a manual removal of placenta. That is going to be required if the placenta is not delivered with controlled cord traction within 20 minutes. Placental delivery, if it does take place, wonderful. Examine the placenta and membranes for its completeness. Make sure there are no missing cotyledons. Make sure there are no subcenuriate lobes which have not been expelled, because this can lead to postpartum hemorrhage and even secondary hemorrhage. Now, controlled cord traction, that is Brand Andrews technique. As I said, it should be performed by a skilled attendant only or trained personnel only. If you're a right-handed person, if you can take a look at this picture here, the left hand, the palmar surface of the fingers should be placed above the pubic symphysis. Body of the uterus is pushed upwards and backwards. So this is providing counter traction. And with your right hand, cord traction is applied in the downward and backward direction. Okay. Remember that the bladder should be empty. The cord or the clamp should be applied close to the vulva for ease of traction, as well as for finding out the permanent lengthening of the cord. It is easier to find it out that way. Apply traction only when the uterus is contracting. If you try to apply traction when the uterus is flabby or relaxed, you will end up with an inverted uterus. Okay. Steady traction to be applied. Traction should not be too violent, or the umbilical cord is going to break. Okay, especially in case of preterm deliveries or intrauterine growth restriction. The umbilical cord is already very fragile. Next, coming to third stage bleeding, that is bleeding which takes place before separation of the placenta. Okay, so management of third stage hemorrhage, first and foremost, control the fundus. Now, fundus is very important, not only to find out whether the uterus is well contracted, but also to find out where exactly is the level of the fundus. You cannot lose the fundus, especially in cases of uterine inversion, or in cases where there are increased accumulation of blood clots in the uterine cavity. The fundus might even travel up and reach the costal margin, and you're going to waste time then searching for the fundus. You cannot afford to waste time in postpartum hemorrhage. So control the fundus with your hand. Always keep it under your vision and massage it, make it hard. So uterine massage is important. Next, oxytocin drip should be started. Arrange for blood and blood products in case transfusion is required. If bleeding does not stop with oxytocin, second line agent you will use is Methergin, that is methyl ergometrin 0.2 mg IV, provided there are no contraindications to its use. Catheterize the bladder. In any case of hemorrhage, bladder should always be catheterized, and then watch if the placenta is separating or not. Okay. If the placenta is separated, well and good. Express it out by controlled cord traction, as we have just seen. If it is not separated within 30 minutes, okay, without controlled cord traction, if it is not separated within 30 minutes, then manual removal of placenta should be done under general anesthesia. Okay. If the cause of third stage hemorrhage is trauma, that is lacerations of the cervix, the vulva, the vagina, then that should be tackled by sutures. Manual removal of placenta. Now the procedure, it should be performed under adequate analgesia and uterine relaxation, ideally under general anesthesia. Very important. Don't try to perform manual removal without any anesthetic method or without any analgesia and uterine relaxation, or the patient might even go into a neurogenic shock. Okay, so avoid that. Aseptic conditions should be followed. Bladder should be catheterized. Aseptic conditions, which means the patient should be in a proper sterilized aseptic operation theater. Arrange for blood and blood products because there could be massive hemorrhage after placental separation. Vigorous fundal massage and uterotonics to prevent atonic postpartum hemorrhage once the placenta has delivered. Antimicrobial prophylaxis, again very important. You can use ampicillin or cefazolin because it's a procedure ultimately, and you do not want any puerperal sepsis. Placenta accreta syndromes ideally may require cesarean hysterectomy. Placenta accrete syndromes we have covered in detail in one of my previous lectures, and it has recently been uploaded on YouTube in case you all want to access it again. Now the procedure of manual removal of placenta, if you can see the first figure over here, both the hands are required for this procedure. One hand grasps the fundus and the other is inserted into the uterine cavity in a conical fashion. Fingers are insinuated in between the placenta and the uterus. So you need to find the plane of cleavage, and then the fingers are swept from side to side as they are advanced, like a slicing movement. Okay. And once the entire placenta is separated, it is grasped and removed. After this, the procedure does not end. You need to start vigorous fundal massage and administration of uterotonics to prevent atonic postpartum hemorrhage, because remember, uterus has been relaxed by you for facilitation of this procedure. Coming to management of postpartum hemorrhage proper. So immediate measures, as I always say, call for help. No matter how good a clinician you are always going to need that help, because all these factors which I'm going to enumerate now are to be carried out simultaneously. You cannot afford to waste any time. So secure 2 large bore IV cannulas, start crystalloid solution infusion, arrange for blood and blood products, catheterize the patient, strictly monitor vitals, that is your vital parameters, pulse, blood pressure, saturation, respiratory rate, urine output. So every 15 minutes, vital parameters are to be assessed. Start nasal oxygen, high flow if required, central line in very severe cases of bleeding. Laboratory investigations, at least baseline investigations you should have, which includes a complete hemogram, coagulation profile, liver function tests, and kidney function tests. Okay, and simultaneously you need to find out what the cause of bleeding is and try to control it. Now RCOG in its Green Top Guideline 52, which is regarding the management of postpartum hemorrhage, has given a protocol for major postpartum hemorrhage in which blood loss is greater than 1000 ml, bleeding is continuing, or there is clinical shock. So first and foremost, management of the circulation, airway, breathing. Position the patient flat or with legs slightly elevated. Keep the woman warm using appropriate available measures. Transfuse blood as soon as possible if clinically required. Until blood is available, crystalloid solutions should be given. So infuse up to 3.5 liters of warmed clear fluid. So initially 2 liters of warmed isotonic crystalloid solution can be given. After this, if blood is still not available, further fluid resuscitation can continue with additional isotonic crystalloid or colloid solutions. Okay. Best equipment available should be used to achieve rapid warmed infusion of fluids. Special blood filters should not be used as the slow infusion. So this we'll discuss in the next part about the blood filters when we talk about blood and blood products. A few terms which you need to know with respect to hemorrhage and shock. Obstetric shock index. So it is a ratio of heart rate and systolic blood pressure. Normal value is around 0.7 to 0.8. More than one value suggestive of massive blood loss, which generally requires blood transfusion in 80% of the cases. Then the golden first hour. The golden first hour is the time at which resuscitation must begin to achieve maximum survival before metabolic acidosis sets in. And the rule of 30. Now this rule is used to measure the severity of shock resulting from at least the loss of 30% of blood volume leading to moderate shock. Okay, so when a woman loses 30% of her blood volume, what are the changes which take place? Systolic blood pressure is likely to fall by 30, heart rate is likely to increase by 30, respiratory rate is likely to be 30 breaths per minute, hemoglobin or hematocrit is likely to drop by 30%, and because of peripheral shutdown, urinary output is likely to be reduced to less than or equal to 30 ml per hour. Now this slide refers to the clinical correlation of signs and symptoms with the amount of blood loss. Okay, so with a blood loss of around 500 to 1000 ml, the systolic blood pressure will still be normal, but patient will start experiencing mild symptoms like palpitations, mild tachycardia and dizziness. Obstetric shock index is still less than 1, so it is a compensated degree of shock. When blood loss increases, that is 1000 to 1500 ml, slight fall in systolic blood pressure, patient experiences weakness, marked tachycardia, sweating. Obstetric shock index is more than 1 and degree of shock is mild. 1500 to 2000 ml of blood loss, moderate fall in systolic blood pressure around 70 to 80. Restlessness, marked tachycardia, patient will be markedly pale and oliguria will set in, as well as concentrated urine, high colored urine. Obstetric shock index more than 1.5 and degree of shock is moderate. You need to intervene, okay? Otherwise it will go into irreversible shock. Amount of blood loss 2000 ml or more, marked fall in systolic blood pressure, almost 50 to 70 millimeters of mercury. The patient may collapse with air hunger and there could be a renal shutdown, okay? Obstetric shock index more than 2 and degree of shock is severe. Okay, now just a brief summarization of management of postpartum hemorrhage in a diagrammatic or a schematic form. So most important, active management of third stage of labor, as we have seen, administration of oxytocin 10 units intramuscular, controlled contraction and uterine massage after placental delivery. This has also been endorsed by the government of India in its 2015 guidance for management of postpartum hemorrhage. So active management of third stage of labor should routinely be given to all patients, especially those with risk factors for postpartum hemorrhage. Okay. So when the blood loss is more than 500 ml, as we saw, it is defined as postpartum hemorrhage. It results in brisk bleeding, BP falling, pulse rising. At this moment, immediate measures, 2 large bore IV cannulas, oxygen administration, monitor the vital parameters, call for help, multidisciplinary team approach. At the same time, try to find out the cause of bleeding. Okay, so whether it is uterine atony, so palpate the fundus and see. Uterine massage should be given. Oxytocin should be started, 20 units per liter, intravenous infusion. Tranexamic acid should be given instantly at the onset of bleeding, 1 gram dose. Next, explore the lower genital tract. Try to find out if there is any bleeding taking place from localized lacerations. Uterine exploration for accumulation of blood clots, which is preventing the uterus from contracting. Inspect the placenta for completeness. Make sure there are no missing lobes or missing cotyledons. And observe the clotting time. Consider baseline laboratory tests like complete hemogram, blood grouping, cross-matching, coagulation screen. And then find out, once you have reached what the cause is, whether it is stone, trauma, tissue or thrombin, accordingly you will give the management. So in cases of atonic uterus, if hemorrhage is continuing despite administration of oxytocin, second line agent is methyl ogometrin, provided there are no other contraindications. If bleeding still doesn't stop, try giving carboprost, 250 micrograms intramuscular every 15 to 90 minutes, maximum of 8 doses, or misoprostol, 600 to 1000 micrograms rectally or orally. In case of genital tract trauma or uterine inversion, suture the lacerations, drain hematomas, especially if they're more than 3 centimeters. Make sure they are not recurring. Replace inverted uterus in cases of partial or complete inversion. Placenta is retained, manual removal of placenta. We have seen this in detail. And coagulopathies, you need to replace the factors. So this fresh frozen plasma, platelet transfusion, packed cell transfusion, all this we will be seeing in detail in the next lecture. Blood loss more than 1000 ml or severe hemorrhage, despite all these measures, if bleeding is still continuing, transfuse blood, platelets, clotting factors, supportive measures in the form of vasopressors to support the blood pressure, and use mechanical methods of stopping postpartum hemorrhage. So uterine tamponade or surgical procedures like compression sutures, ligation, vessel embolization, and hysterectomy as a last life-saving procedure. So again, mechanical management and surgical management I will be discussing in detail in the next lecture. Okay, now RCOG recommendations with regards to postpartum hemorrhage. Women with known risk factors for PPH should only be delivered at a hospital with a blood bank on site. Okay, clinicians should be aware that the visual estimation of peripartum blood loss is inaccurate and that clinical signs and symptoms should be included in the assessment of postpartum hemorrhage. For women without risk factors for PPH, delivering vaginally, oxytocin is the agent of choice for prophylaxis in the 3rd stage. Clinicians should consider the use of intravenous tranexamic acid. We have seen this in addition to oxytocin at cesarean section to reduce blood loss in women at risk of PPH. So even during cesarean section, tranexamic acid should be used along with oxytocin to reduce blood loss, especially in cases in whom you are anticipating a more than normal loss of blood. Every maternity unit should have a multidisciplinary protocol for the management of postpartum hemorrhage, and every staff member should be trained in it so that you're not losing out on valuable time when the emergency actually arises. Also, accurate documentation of a delivery with postpartum hemorrhage is essential. Remember that any 3rd stage complication, be it manual removal of placenta or postpartum hemorrhage, in itself is a risk factor for further risk of postpartum hemorrhage. So accurate documentation is very important, even with regards to the number of blood and blood products which have been transfused. So a detailed recording should be provided to the patient on her discharge card as well. Coming to the sequelae, so hypovolemic shock due to massive hemorrhage, disseminated intravascular coagulation due to inadequate replenishment of coagulation factors, maybe in cases of massive hemorrhage. Severe anemia can result again with severe bleeding. Organ failure because of ischemia, necrosis, acute tubular necrosis, renal failure, hepatic failure, respiratory distress syndrome due to prolonged hypoxia, lactational failure, again due to debilitated state of the patient and severe anemia, or even Sheehan syndrome. Sepsis, increased incidence or increased susceptibility to infection. Sheehan syndrome, which is pituitary apoplexy in cases of acute, severe, massive postpartum hemorrhage, and increased maternal morbidity and mortality. As we have seen, postpartum hemorrhage contributes in a large way to maternal mortality, especially in the developing countries. So with that, let's just summarize what we have seen in today's lecture. So my take-home message today is postpartum hemorrhage is a major cause of maternal mortality and morbidity. Identification of risk factors is very important. Attentiveness and efficient management of 3rd stage of labor is going to go a long way. Active management of 3rd stage of labor again reduces blood loss. Appropriate and timely use of uterotonics is essential. Fluid resuscitation and judicious use of blood and blood products can be life-saving. Strict monitoring for at least 1 hour after delivery of all patients is vital, which is also called as the 4th stage of labor. It is very important to monitor the patients in that 1 hour postpartum. Staff should be trained in PPH management protocol of the hospital to save precious time and improve maternal outcome. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of today's part 1 of postpartum hemorrhage. Thank you very much. You have been a wonderful audience.